technique here. Now, XCO this is a sort of special lecture in the favour for his group. He has to leave at 1 o'clock precisely. So what I'd like to do next Thursday is to start the lecture at 12 exactly. So if you can all get here 10, 15 minutes earlier than you normally do. And then we can finish the lecture at 1. It means you can either have a break in the section or you can just wait. Okay? So, everybody. The two readings for XCO will be out this afternoon. What XCO is talking about is work he's intimately involved with now, trying to, how do we use design basically for social action, particularly towards sustainability, but not just towards sustainability, towards kind of social innovation in general. It gives me great pleasure, but it will also give me some embarrassment, this lecture, as you will see, to introduce Lisa Garoka, who is the Academic Dean for Design Initiatives at Parsons, teaches on MFA Transdisciplinary University. Lisa is a communication designer, education and researcher at Parsons, where she spent the last 6 years as Dean of Academic Initiatives. Before arriving here, she was Director of the Communication Design Masters at our MIT University in Melbourne, and the Creative Director of Studio Anybody between 1998 and 2004. She's a BFA in Graphic Design and American Studies from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, an MFA in Painting, and then Design in Communication Design, and a PhD in Design, PhD by project from our MIT University. The PhD explores the reflective agency of design research, and she's now exploring the impact of this on the K-12 environment and on design-based learning. Lisa is also at the moment heading up an initiative which we're trying to get going here to actually bring in design-based, project-based PhDs into Parsons. This is like a project which is about at a time period of something like evolution. But we are fighting for that. So eventually, some of you may even come back and do a PhD here. With us. Anyway, with great pleasure, well actually with partial pleasure and partial embarrassment, and you'll see why, let me introduce Lisa.
It will soon become very apparent. Really terrible way for me to start my lecture. It's like when you sit down to watch a DVD, and the first thing that comes up is an authoritative, negative message, and all you want to do is press fast forward and skip the self-righteous speech. But I guess in the same way that corporations want to protect their copyright, I want to protect your right to an education that acknowledges the diversity of people in this room. I am no feminist scholar. In fact, the last women's studies paper I did was in an undergraduate degree, and I only ended up there by accident. And yet, I remember what it was like to hear my professor back then saying that we were going to only read fiction written by women this semester because the chances are that every text you were assigned to read at high school was written... Oh, it's not working.
Sorry, they normally deliver us a microphone.
There's a microphone on the table. On the other table.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Did you hear anything I said? Should I start again? Okay, alright, this is a little embarrassing to do it twice. Okay. I can't help but think this is a terrible way to start my lecture for a second time. It's when you sit down to watch a DVD and the first thing that comes up is the authoritative negative statement that makes you just want to press fast forward and skip the self-righteous speech. But I guess in the same way that corporations want to protect their copyright, I want to protect your right to an education that acknowledges the diversity of people in this room. I am no feminist scholar. In fact, the last women's studies paper I did was in an undergraduate degree, and I only ended up there by accident. And yet to this day I remember what it was like to hear my professor say that we'll only be reading fiction written by women this semester because the chances are that every book you're assigned at high school was written by a man. And she was right. But this was last century, however, and I would like to think that this was not the story of your high school experiences. And yet last year, I stood here at the same time of year and I showed the statistical ratios of male to female speakers and authors of the readings you'd been assigned. I found it hard to do, and I pissed off some people, and yet this year, I find myself compelled to say something again. But this time I can go one better, and not make my argument with numbers, which seem too social research-like for me, and instead make a visual argument. This is not my idea. Sophie Ho, a student in the trans program, shared this with me as part of her assignment. She did it earlier in the semester for this course, but it pretty much says everything that I need to say. The only thing I wanted to add before I started my talk is you don't have to put up with this. The composition of the people we hear, speak, and who you read directly impacts our thinking and our ability and ultimately our capacity to remake design for this century. That's not moving on. But I'll come back to this. For now, I'm going to get on with my real presentation. That was freezing. Sorry. Here, that knows what to do.
A lost number in the equation, a simple, understandable miscalculation. And what if, on the basis of that, the world as we know it changed its matter of fact? Let me get it right. What if we got it wrong? What if we weakened ourselves getting strong? What if we found in the ground a vial of proof? What if the foundations missed a vital truth? What if the industrial dream sold us out from within? What if our impenetrable defense sealed us in? What if our wanting more was making less? And what if all this wasn't progress? Let me get it right. What if we got it wrong? What if we weakened ourselves getting strong? What if our wanting more was making less? And what if all this wasn't progress?
This is the beginning. Kia ora, welcome. Ko Lisa Grocott, taka winoa. Ko Ngāti Porou, e Ngāti Kahungunu na iwi. Ko Waikato na awa. Ko Nui na mana. Ko Brooklyn na kaina. Ko Hapa Emos Takatama. Ko Madam Takatane. Ko Aotearoa na Tūranga Waiwai. It is almost 2 decades since I left New Zealand, and yet today I'm drawn to introduce myself to you in Māori, acknowledging my ancestors, my river, my mountain, the country that represents the place where I stand. This welcome forces me to recall the land that my people have lived off for thousands of years. Cicé's poem confronts me to recognise that what if, a phrase I've always associated with the speculative question directed toward the future, can also be used as an accusatory question that calls us to reflect on the world we have already made. I am the kind of practitioner who chooses fiction over theory, who is more interested in storytelling than philosophizing, and yet occasionally reading design text, there is a fragment, not even a full sentence, but a phrase that quickens my heart, that makes me smile. Years before I met Clive, when I was still in Australia, I read an early text of his where he wrote about the idea of design being about the realm of possibilities. And what I took away from this was the insight that designers were drawn to not explain how the world is, but to question what the world might be. And this is why I've always thought of what if. It's not a question that looks to the past, but it's a way of proposing into the future. And this, above all else, is what I hold dear about design. So the hunch behind this lecture is that even if design is all about potential to make the world, that previous decades of design education have not paid enough attention to the responsibility that comes with being world makers. I feel lucky for you because I think that as a generation of art and design education is shifting, and we are being more respectful and questioning of our role in making that world that Cicé alludes to. And that's pretty much how I see this course. And one small way we can do that, I think, is to be more explicit about how designers might use their skills in propositional thinking in more constructive ways. Not to just embed new things for the sake of novelty, but to more carefully, creatively prototype the future we want. This presentation is less an ethics lecture and more an exploration of what we might learn from other fields that as we make a call for change, speculate about the future, or present a case for where we're already going. The focus here is on turning Cicé's question around and ask, what if, from here on in, we want to act differently? The lectures you've already seen this semester have framed the context we find ourselves in. We now see that the world that we've made and the problems we face are the consequence of a confluence of forces, social, political, technological, environmental, and yet knotted together in ways that call for an expanded field of practice for both art and design. Through your studies, you now know key topics of sustainability, urbanism, healthcare, education, and you know associated buzzwords, emergent, adaptive, participatory, resilience. Hopefully, you've also come to respect that these problems are far-reaching and certainly unable to be addressed by one discipline. In the face of these systemic problems, it's easy to feel thwarted by the extensive analysis of the situation that a social scientist might do, the irreconcilable factions, the entrenched nature of the challenges, and the overwhelming sense that no single intervention will ever have an impact. And yet, as Clive has no doubt highlighted, inaction is a very real problem too. So the argument here is that potentially one of the real contributions of designers in this space is that we do take action. We speculate, we prototype, we observe, we reflect, then we reframe and speculate some more. This might not be a theoretical practice, but it does need to be a critical practice. So I'm not going to do a show and tell presentation of my work. Recent learning science suggests that you're only going to remember the beginning of my talk. So I'm not going to go and talk about the work that I did in the studio or the work that I did at Parsons or the work that I did for my PhD. But I do want to take a moment to talk about the ideas that were framed within the project-based PhD that Clive referred to. I just showed you 2 decades of work in 30 seconds. So my recent work now is actually focused on designing in the context of learning. And I don't just mean formal education, but also reflective learning and how we negotiate new understandings that emerge from a diversity of lived experiences. So I really am interested in this idea that if you only take away one thing from this lecture, if you only take away the point that I open with, that this, above everything else, is what I want you to hold on to. Your education at Parsons is about so much more than the technical, material, conceptual and aesthetic skills you apply in your studio projects every day. You are also learning to embody a particular way of negotiating and acting in the world. And it is this mindset, this way of thinking through making, that I want you to realise that I believe is the most transferable asset I think your education offers you. Of course, this is my bias, but it's my lecture, so I get to make these grand claims, right? But this idea here, this idea of a recursive, action-oriented, speculative process, framed by its commitment to intervene, to take action, to seek out new possible solutions, This is the stuff that I hear about. This diagram here introduces the notion of the future's cone. This graphic is not about design, and yet I find it interesting in the context of the ideas about design being about potential, about being about the realm of possibilities. Because then we're talking about how we negotiate the plausible, the probable, with the preferable. So I'm about to present a whole lot of case studies that introduce different fields, from different fields, that introduce, that have proposed future scenarios, sometimes directly advocating for the preferable, other times cautioning us by way of forecasting a catastrophic plausible, or holding up a window to the probable. In different ways, the projects disclose strategies for shaping the future, strategies that I will then compare to a few design projects. As I said, this interest in future scenarios is wedded to the idea that art and design can play a significant role in how we rehearse the future and build a preferable tomorrow. I teach in the transdisciplinary program here, as Clive mentioned, and it's been an interesting learning curve for both faculty and students alike as we try to make sense of how this new emergent field of design might take shape. But one thing that research has shown us is that the ability to collaborate with others is greatly enhanced by two interrelated ideas. One, your understanding of what your partner brings to the collaboration, and two, your understanding of the limits of your own knowledge base. So either way you look at it, as designers and artists, we need to be able to explain to others what we do, and it is like, and how it is like and unlike the way other fields work. For years working on my PhD, I took a defensive position, always trying to account for how unique design is. But for this lecture, I thought it would be interesting to explore the similarities with other fields, to better understand how others think propositionally, since propositional thinking is part of the goal for you in this course, so that we might better understand ourselves. And this is the part of the lecture that apparently you won't even remember, but I have added a few videos, which neuroscience tells us means that you're 3 times more likely to recall some of it. So to begin, let's look at the way that the field of advertising tackles this idea of proposing new futures. This example, from as far south as you can go before hitting Antarctica, is from my home country.
Oh no, George is driving. He's too wasted. I should say something, but I could look down in front of Monique. Bro, Monique says you're dumb. But if he crashes, I'll have to live with his family.
Puzzle time.
And if he dies, Ghost George will haunt me.
Grab a chip. Watch out. You know I can't grab your ghost chips. Go away.
Spoon.
Spaceship. What are you doing, bro?
Well, I've been internalizing a really complicated situation in my head.
What are you on about?
I don't think you should drive.
Nah.
Nah, you're too drunk, bro. Just crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay.
Stop away from driving drunk. Legend.
I really get to claim in this setting that Aotearoa is my turanga waiwai, which is this great word that means the place where I stand. And yet all the material and verbal cues in this short clip remind me that this is my home. It may be what they were saying might be as challenging for you to understand as it is for me to read Heidegger, but the reason this video resonates for me more than you reading European philosophy is not simply because it reflects my own lived experience. I find this project pertinent to our work here for multiple reasons, least of which is the authenticity with which it speaks to its audience. When we think of propositional thinking, it's easy to think in terms of near or sci-fi futures, right? But I appreciate that this project is not so much looking to the future as much as a parallel world where a community takes on the collective responsibility to stop people from drinking. This idea of behaviour modification is key to why I'm sharing this, since it is similar to the one we face in considering issues of sustainability, because there is no product here on sale, but more a moral call to act in a way that might single you out from your peers. And the way I see it, this is done in 2 different ways. So the cultural memes, it turns out that the clip also resonates with more than just the targeted New Zealand audience. I don't know, the guy fixed it before he came, so I don't know. Because it will do it for the whole rest of the thing. He said he had to turn one projector off, so it's like a dual projector. So. just keep going on to these still images. So what you can't really tell here is that, so the YouTube stats show that the 1 million+ viewers in the space of a few weeks that were viewing this were largely from the US. One friend described it to me as the whale rider meets Harold and Kumar. What is more interesting is how calculatedly, I think, that ad agencies set out introducing phrases like ghost chips and internalizing a really complex idea in my head with the notion of elusive ghost jobs appearing immediately appropriated by the political parties. Is it national election on at the time? So that's the Prime Minister offering ghost jobs to the guy. And also the idea of critical reframing, because to get to the core of the desire to modify change behaviour, the ad shifts a sense of responsibility. In Australia and New Zealand, they had decades where they ran drug driving ads where the byline was bloody idiot. And the antithesis of this ad is the one that uses these authority figures as threats or victim parents to guilt the drinking driver. And in this way, the clip is totally turned round and suggests the collective responsibility lies with the friends. The second example also uses humour and narrative as primary strategies. Yet this time the visual aspect recedes and the craft is all about words. And if I liked how the New Zealand clip represented my home country, this novel, like most I seem to read, speaks to my life in New York. So I don't even read that, but the first one is just written more like in text language, and the second one says everybody sounds stoned because they're emailing people the whole time they're talking to you. Egan's visit from the Goon Squad won the Pulitzer